Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. My name is Latanya Reese Miles, also known as LT. I'm currently a new director of sales and university partnerships with a company called Re-Up Education. Um, However, that's not why I'm here today. I'm here here because of past uh, past involvement with specifically Loyola Marymount University, where I was the director of the Academic Resource Center and uh, created a program called First to Go. Wasn't planning on doing that, but I did that. And before LMU was at UCLA, and I was director of the McNair Scholars Program, along with a couple of other cohort programs, doing first gen work at both institutions. I also am the co-creator along with the co-founder along with Danelle of the Empowering First Generation College Students Facebook group. It has 7,200 people in it. Crazy. And also the thought leader behind First Gen and Juice brand. So excited to be here today to talk about this topic of the special collection that I started, and I hope to have just like a really good conversation about it and like the meaning of it. I'm gonna be honest, I haven't fully processed the significance of it myself, but that this is going to be this conversation will be a way to do that. So I'm going to kick this over to our moderator and have him introduce himself. And Danelle, I'm not going to introduce anybody. I'll speak for yourselves, but I'm going to start over, kick it over right now to Romeo Guzman.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Maybe I'll just say a little bit about how I know LT, and then I'll talk about how I got into archives and history. I was undergrad at UCLA, and I assumed that I was special because LT had this like ability to just understand where people were and where they need to go. And I always assumed that I had this like special bond. It was just like me and LT. But I realized once I became an educator that actually she treats everyone that like that, and that stuck with me. Right, this thing about regardless of where people are at, your job isn't to reproduce individuals, but to actually think about each person as their own sort of having their own trajectory and goal. Right, so I went off. Well, I went off and vacationed a little bit. I traveled through Mexico, but then eventually I got back into school, did an MA, and then got into a PhD program in history. Went to the East Coast, came back, and I was trained as a Latin American historian actually. And my process to become sort of an archivist and public historian was really with this arts collective that wasn't based at any institution. That was really just me and my wife, just doing things in El Monte. And part of our dissatisfaction with the history of El Monte, its official narrative, its white pioneer narrative, is a result of how I became a public historian, how I became an archivist. And now I teach this stuff at sort of these formal academic institutions. Um, but so then my sort of arrival at this point comes from different perspectives, right? So I'll do a couple things today just as a way to both situate us and then also as a way to think about the archive as being a process and not like an end result, right? So I'll sort of maybe share some of the more exciting things that are happening in the archival world, and that'll sort of serve as a way to sort of get us started. I don't want to assume that everyone knows what an archive is because I still don't know what an archive is, right? So maybe I'll just start by saying that an archive is by no means the purview of historians, but it is one of the ways in which historians produce knowledge. And an archive essentially holds records from the past, and it holds records that were written in the past by folks from that moment in that period. And one of the things about archives that you all probably know, right, is that for many historians, if there is no archive, there is no history to write. So in many ways, the archive dictates what we can write, what we can't write, and also what faculty and professors think people can write, right? So, and let me just say a couple more things about the archive, right, is that if you're a marginalized community member, from the present all the way till whenever we want to start the sort of our moment in time, is that marginalized folks often enter the archive as objects, not subjects, right? That means that if you're a historian of slavery and you're trying to figure out the experience of slaves, you're probably going to be looking at historical records that were written and produced by slave owners and not the slaves themselves, right? So you have to get really creative. But the point here is that for the most part, a lot of our communities have entered not as subjects that were producing and writing, right? But as sort of objects that were being written about, and oftentimes being written about when they were in trouble, when they were at a court case, or when they were entering in bad ways and engaging with the state. And of course, the archive itself isn't just primary sources. Someone has to build them and collect them. And for a long time, archival repositories, collections, the Huntington, UCLA, LMU, really focused on white men who had read stuff, who had some sort of power or prestige, right? So there's sort of multiple levels in which people like us, our marginalized communities, were A, not subjects, right? But then B, our people weren't being asked to donate material. Our people weren't being asked to actively become part of these archival institutions. So in that sense, right, there's this whole history, both institutionally and in terms of what we think of as a primary source, that's excluded um, our voices in very particular ways. The other thing I want to say is that, so that's like, if that's a history of archives right now, obviously it's a very sort of broad strokes. Let me talk a little bit about the future of archives, which I think is much more exciting. And the future is already here, but I think the archive is a place where we not just learn about social injustice, but we're actively engaged in it, and it provides us a space to actually actively correct that, right? So when we find out that murals were destroyed, whitewashed, or banned in a certain city, and we use that as inspiration to sort of reactivate these murals and repaint these murals, the archive then becomes a place to not just engage the past, but to actively restore some of those injustices, right? So in that sense, the archive can be a place of imagining a future that's embedded in social justice. The archive is also becoming increasingly a place to play, and the archive is also becoming increasingly a place that includes other folks, artists, journalists, non-academics. And as a result of that, we're seeing things that are being produced that are non-academic, that are also for a larger audience, right? And one of the best examples I can think is the journalist Danelle George was asked to go look at the Octavia Butler papers, right? And I think most historians would have just gone in there and they would have they would have read the first drafts of Parable of the Sower, and they would have talked about the differences, right? Danelle George didn't do that. What Danelle George did was she tried to figure out how it is that Octavia Butler built a world in which she could be a writer. So what she produced from spending time with the Octavia Butler archive at the Huntington was actually a sort of self-help guide to how to be a writer, right? How to become a writer, and also illustrating how it was on the marginalia, right, on the shopping list, on these little sort of papers in which Octavia Butler not just manifested who she wanted to become, in which she imagined herself as actually being a writer. So then the archive is increasingly a place that allows for multiple things to be produced that are non-academic monographs, right? So a question we can ask, if we sort of phrase it as a question, is what do we want to make from the archive, right? Or what does the archive allow us to make or imagine? And the last one, which I think is really important, because oftentimes we sort of deposit material and then we leave, or at least archivists will take the material and then they'll leave. I think the archive is also about a process, and the archive allows us to build relationships with people, right? And in doing that, in its best instances, it allows us to reimagine relationships with marginalized communities, right? And what that means, I think, for some of the best archivists, some of the best public historians, is that we're no longer collecting or building projects based on our needs. We're actually building archives and building projects based on what the community's desires and needs and aspirations are. So in this sense, right, we might ask of the archive, how does this further first gen projects, right? Or how does this actually respond to first gen needs? So these are the different ways in which I'm thinking about the archive. These are different ways in which folks are thinking about the archive. And I thought we could maybe just begin by you all telling us what's in the archive, and then maybe like what hopes you have for the archive.
Sure. Before I do that, Danelle, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, LT, and thanks, Romeo, for that introduction and just the insights into what an archive is and like how we should be thinking about it when we start this conversation. So my name is Danelle Dyckhoff Stelzriede. I currently hold a position at Cal State LA as an assistant professor of English and the director of the first year writing program there. I do a lot of interdisciplinary work. So I study contemporary multi-ethnic American lit, translingual and anti-racist writing pedagogies, and international first-gen experiences and identities. So I do work in Comp and Lit in studies in higher education. But before I came to Cal State LA, I actually worked at LMU for almost a decade in a lot of different positions. I wore a lot of different hats, a lot of different hats. I started work there as a graduate student, and I was a teaching fellow in the English department. And then I was hired on as a part-time lecturer. And then I met LT, and I came on as the coordinator for the First to Go program. I worked as a university advisor in the Academic Resource Center. And then I ended up, I think we elevated my title from coordinator to associate director of the First to Go program in my last couple of years there. So thank you for that, LT. And I, so again, I've kind of worn a lot of different hats over the years. I've done a lot of different work, but I can honestly say that my time in the First to Go program was probably the most impactful and transformative of all of the different types of work that I've done over the years. So I came to LMU in 2012, that fall semester, and it was like 3 weeks before I was supposed to get married. So I was just a hot mess. Like my mind was everywhere. I was like all my attention distracted in a million different places. But I just remember that feeling of coming on in the Academic Resource Center and being a part of LT's team and just feeling like this electric surge of energy, right? Like I was just so into everything that was happening in that office and the work that the students were doing, the work LT was doing. And I think part of that is for the very first time in my life, I actually had a vocabulary to talk about my first generation college identity and my identity as a working class student and like what that meant, right? A self-supporting working class first gen student. And prior to that, I just didn't have that language. So I was telling LT that in many ways, my time at LMU feels like a lifetime ago, like 6 years have passed since I've been there. And it just feels like so long. But when I went to the event in November, it was like no time had passed at all. All of just like the conversations, the connections, the hugs, like talking with former students and colleagues. And again, that like electric energy that you just feel as part of this community. So I just wanted to acknowledge, LT, thank you for bringing me into this community. You have a way of making everybody feel like they're like the most special person in the world and you just get us. And I'm just really excited to be a part of this conversation tonight.
Love you, Nellie. All right. So to answer the question, I'll provide some context, especially since I have historians and librarians here. So I started working at LMU in 2010. So from 2010 to 2016. And just on my own, I was journaling. And in fact, Danelle and I would trade giving journals to one another, blank journals to one another, just to capture that experience of it was just my day to day. But over the course of that 6 years, um, Danelle and I and a third person, Marissa Cervantes, established the First to Go program. And so what's captured in those journals is not only sort of the day to day of me just running the Academic Resource Center and creating a number of initiatives and whatnot, but also the establishment of that program. What's interesting about that time period is that there was also a national movement that was happening about first gen students. If you look back 2010, there really wasn't a lot about first gen students. So people were reaching out to me to ask me like, hey, what's going on your campus? And so I'm journaling all of that. So imagine 6 years of that, right? It's 6 different journals, I believe. And so about a year ago, I had this box with all these journals, and I didn't really want. I mean, I knew that they're special, but I didn't want to keep reading them. I had a feeling that they would be of value to other people who may have been curious about what that was like. And so I reached out to the dean of the LMU library, Christine Brancolini, who was a good friend of mine, and said, "Hey, do you want this stuff?" I didn't even think you could do that. I'm not lying. And she immediately said yes. And from there, I started like looking around the office that I'm in right now, like, wow, what else can I contribute? So there's some frame photographs, the journals, um, some awards that I won and plaques and things like that. if you know me, you know, I'm like, I'm actually limelight avoidant, so I didn't want to keep that stuff. But I thought, Liz, stop laughing. But I thought it'd be a value. And so I think those are the primary things that that are the foundation for the archive. And there's a digital component too, but we could talk about that later.
Okay. I mean, you asked on Twitter, like what people would donate to it. So I'm curious is if we imagine this like as a multi-year project, not that you're on LMU's payroll, but like if we imagine that the archivists, that the folks at LMU, that this is a starting point for them to think more deeply about the experiences of first-gen students. And maybe we can open this up to anybody, right? Especially Danelle, but also just folks that are here. Like what kinds of things not only should we collect, but like how should what we collect inform how we build a campus? Does that make sense?
Danelle, you're on mute.
Right, I've only been using this technology for like 3 years now, and give me a break here. So I was thinking about this actually, and this is something that I hadn't run by LT. So sorry if this is like not what you had in mind, but I think you're gonna love it. I was thinking actually exactly as Romeo was talking about, that we really should open this up to anyone who is involved in the community. So it's like amazing you started this collection and we have all of these artifacts. It's kind of like the foundation of this archive, but there are so many different students who have come in throughout the years, and staff and first to go mentors, right? So I'm thinking like photos or journals or art or video, documenting the growth of this community. Any of that would be amazing to have. And I think that we should, extend the invitation to the Facebook group, or any folks that we're still in contact with. Like if they want to donate to this exhibit, this is what we can do. Because your memory, LT, of what has happened in this program, like that's one part of the story. And like, let's be real, it's an amazing like powerhouse, like first gen world takeover part of the story, but it's still one part of the story. And I really think that this archive deserves at least like 3 full floors in the Hannon Library. So I think we got to make that happen. Let's extend the invitation.
I'll just jump in really quickly. And that's really what we want to avoid, is this being like one singular narrative, because we're just going to duplicate what's been done before. LaTanya's version of the event. I have my perspective, and there are so many other perspectives, especially the students. So I think focusing on them is important. Also, one really critical person to invite to this table is Liz. Liz is right here. Liz is the archivist that worked with me, my co-collaborator on this. So Liz, I'm so glad that you're here. So we can also ask, what this experience was like for her specifically. But I just wanted to make sure we acknowledge her as this is a great conversation, a great question.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Cepeda, but I go by Liz. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the University Archivist at LMU. I'm super excited just to listen and be a part of this conversation. I think that one of the most, I just started in my role I've been in a year for my role now. I started in January 2022. And LT was one of the first people and donors that I worked with, and it's been a really inspirational experience for me. I think that there's a lot to say about these journals coming into the archive, because they weren't meant to be in an archive, right? So they're so honest and so, and I'm not saying that everybody should donate their journal to their archive, but I think that there's something really special about it. And I think that there's always an opportunity for us to collaborate, especially because learning about the First to Go program, it's so well connected and so well like communicated. Even just thinking about the event in November and how highly attended it was, I think it's really important to kind of tap into those things. And being so new to my role, I'm super open to making these connections with the community, especially for students that are like the ones that are going to leave the soonest, right? And those that have left. But yeah, I think that the most exciting thing about working now is, Roma mentioned, is like the allowance for creativity, and so I think we are in a space that is really open to that. At least I am in that. So, but yeah, I really liked your question though. Thank you for asking. Thank you for letting me talk. I'm just here to listen.
The LMU has a really dope collection of migrant letters by the Venegas family, and the daughter who donated the collection, she found them after her father's death in the 90s, and she was first gen, and she was a professor of Spanish at LMU, Teresa Venegas. So there's also these other like first gen collections that maybe aren't branded that way, but that they're already there too, right? So it'd be interesting to sort of think about how these things are in conversation, but also how the archive itself, how we sort of allow for different narratives to be told once we're in the archive. So I guess, LT, like, what, not that you're a historian, right, or that you want to write about yourself, but like what kinds of stories or what kinds of projects can you imagine coming from having, like, if I were to read your thing, right, your 6 journals, like what would I write about? Like how would I write about them, or what would I analyze about them, or like what, or how might it inform how I go build a program somewhere else, right? Or even like how you might reform the program at LMU. I don't know if that.
Damn, this is what happens when you bring experts into the conversation. Uh, and Liz and I or as we were pulling everything together, I remember asking her, like, what did you see as you were going through my journals? Because again, I want to stress, I was writing for myself. I wasn't writing with the expectation of someone reading it, right? So I think what strikes me is that this isn't, you wouldn't go in and seeing, oh, this is me establishing a first gen program. This was the first gen program within the context of rebranding the Academic Resource Center, working with the JA and study abroad, and creating the bunch program. So I think what people may be struck by is that it wasn't just a singular thing that you'll see in the narratives within the journal, I guess. And like the other thing that I had mentioned too is also seeing the context of what was happening nationally. But again, it won't be like long paragraphs. It may be, oh, I got a phone call today from Santa Clara University or something. And I think maybe, again, this is me sort of objectifying myself, but it's kind of like the offhandedness of it. So there was definitely like strategy and deliberation, but there also I wasn't a mastermind at the same time. There was so many things going on. So I'm probably telling my story, but also the story of the formation of other initiatives and also my students' stories too. If someone had a bad day, I don't know, Liz, you read them more recently, but if a student had a situation, John Easy or something coming in with some self doubt, chances are I probably wrote about it in my journal as well. But again, one perspective. I don't have the
Yeah.
dominant narrative here.
All right, so maybe I could turn this to Danelle, right? Like as a professor of English, as a professor of like form and genre, right? Like the journaling is a specific genre. Like I guess, like how might you use this archive either with your students or either like, I'm just curious, like what your own engagement with the archive might be.
Yeah, that's a great question. So like I mentioned when I did my introduction, is that my career has taken a lot of twists and turns over the years. So like I went into grad school wanting to study modern British poetry, and then I became really interested in Caribbean lit. And then I ended up writing a dissertation on contemporary representations of 19th century US empire building. So you cannot like have more split. And then today, I'm a professor of comp and rhetoric at Cal State LA. So like there's just been a lot of different things that have happened right over the course of my career. But the one overarching focus that has connected all of that, like all of those splits and just kind of shifts in topics, is the idea of representation. Like that's really what I'm interested in as a professor, what I'm interested in as a first gen scholar. It's just like, how are folks being represented? So I'm mainly interested in certain types of stories, like stories that show, how folks have been misrepresented or misremembered or silenced in the interest of preserving these like treasured American narratives. of democracy or meritocracy, or equal opportunity, right? Like these kind of treasured American narratives. I want to know more about stories that show different versions of what it means to be American, and stories that can help us to better understand systems of privilege and disprivilege and how those operate nationally and globally. And so for me, all of this is very much connected to the first gen experience and how it's represented. So I mentioned in the chat, like I've done work in the past with the archive at LMU, where I've taken students for like a special session a few times a semester to study artifacts that are connected with a story that we're reading. So for Reign of Gold, Victor Villaseñor's Reign of Gold, I took them in to study the Venegas Papers. And it would be something where like I could envision a lot of the work I do at Cal State LA now, like deals explicitly with writing pedagogies that promote equity and inclusion for students across diverse backgrounds. So I could imagine just going into this archive at LMU or taking a field trip and just having students do some work there. I also just wanted to note, like as we're talking about archives, I just think a lot about memory and representation, and we all know like memories fade, right? That was made painfully clear to me when I attended this event in November, and I was telling LT, I forgot so much of this stuff. It's only been 6 years, and there's like all these programs and initiatives and events that we did, and I forgot so much of it. So even someone like me who is there, like doing the work on the day to day, I don't remember half of what we did. And I feel like that is sort of the value of an archive like this. Like, we might forget what we did, the significance of it, the impact it had, but this kind of collection ensures that we have a lasting record of what we did together, that we have a lasting record of those accomplishments, right? And that record empowers our community. We are now a part of the historical record in a really formal sort of like institutional way. And we're like changing what the institution means. We're changing what that history is. And so, yes, like this is super empowering for our community, but it can also serve people down the road, folks who might want to start a program up like this at other institutions. It could serve as a kind of blueprint, the archive could. So I'll stop there, but those are just my thoughts.
I'm going to ask one more question, then I'll sort of open it up. As a proud Bruin, had a good friend who was up for a job at LMU, and then they didn't move forward. So right now I'm like, oh, whatever with LMU. So I guess I'm just kind of being a hater, and I'm wondering like why didn't these things end up over at, on the west side, right, at UCLA? Like our archives in the basement, not on the third floor like LMU, like they did it right over there. But I'm just curious, like how did you decide, or did you decide, right, between the two campuses? Or
You ask such great questions. I have great observations. So the rationale for choosing UCLA could have been, it's where I did my dissertation work. Truly and truthfully, the notion of first to go actually started when I was working at UCLA. It was like 2008 or something like that, and that phrase was used for a workshop that I led over there. However, going back to this notion of like power and agency, I, like Danelle, felt transformed by my experience at LMU. It was just a golden time, a golden era in my life, and I wanted to have control over my story and my history, and I deliberately and intentionally wanted it at LMU to reflect how I feel about LMU and reflect my time there. And I just didn't want it to be co-opted by any other place, including my own alma mater. So there was certainly an intentionality there. And I mean, I didn't even try. I didn't even ask. I didn't even think about UCLA. It was really all about in some ways giving back to LMU.
Can I just add to that? Because I worked at LMU for a really long time, and in a lot of different capacities, and I have kind of like a complicated relationship with LMU professionally, because on the one hand, like I feel like I put in a lot, like in the time I was there in the English department and just in the different roles that I was in. But it can be very, very hard for a former graduate student to, secure any type of like full-time permanent position. So I have a lot to thank LT for, just like seeing me and like bringing me into the academic resource center in that full-time role. But my experience at LMU was like a mixed bag. And I am a first gen college student. I was a first gen faculty member, first gen staff member, right? So like I worked with the students there in a really just like close capacity. And what it was like when we were there, LT, 33% of the student population identified as first gen, somewhere around there. But so many of the students, LMU is an expensive school, and so many of the students come from families or parents who could afford to pay that $55,000 tuition a year without having to take out loans, right? It's just kind of like a different type of student population. So for me, like when I think about the significance of this type of archive being at a school like LMU, it's so important. If these types of archives are, and I can say more about this later, but if these types of archives are intimidating or exclusive seeming to some students, and like there's a sense that like I don't know what to do in this space, or I don't know that my university has a space like this where I can go in and like access these materials, and that is, I think, the experience of a lot of students. When these students are brought into this space and they see in the library like themselves and their experiences reflected as subjects worth studying, as subjects worth preserving, right? The subjects that have value, like this is incredibly empowering for students to see at an institution like LMU. So yes, I think this could be set up at UCLA or Cal State LA or any number of institutions in the LA area or across the country. I would love to see one at Kennesaw State, right, where I used to teach. But there is a special kind of significance for a collection like this to be at a place like LMU.
Definitely. I had a buddy who we played college together, or we played soccer together in high school. Sorry, and he has a kid who's going to college now, and he's like, "Oh, I got to go to Oregon for the weekend." And I was like, "What the fuck? What are you talking about, dude?" He's like, "Yeah, it's basically they had like orientation for parents, and it was like a whole, and it wasn't just like come give us money or like come see our fancy school. It was like a real legit orientation about what it means to be in, like it was for parents to learn what the hell their kids are going to be doing in college, right?" And I thought that only happens because of first gen students and because there's folks that are in places of power where they're centering the first gen experience and they're saying like we need to bring the whole family to campus into college, right? Like not just the kids. So one of the things I think is really cool, or a possible sort of venue is to think about the parent sibling experience of first to go, right? And how that can expand the archive too. I just want to give a shout out to the previous archivist at LMU. I don't remember his name. It's escaping me, but he's Mexican American who looks like a white guy, and he's at the Huntington now. But one of the things that he's been doing there is not just collecting letters, but doing oral histories with the workers at the Huntington, right? Because they really make that place work. So I also think that the archivists, the changing landscape of archivists is also changing what the archive looks like, right? So folks like Liz, right? Folks that are now becoming archivists are also very much helping us reimagine how an archive works and who it works for. Let's open it up for questions if folks have any questions. The question is, as alumni, how do we submit our own documents, narratives to the archive?
Liz or Jamie, can you take that one?
There's various ways to do it. One of the most important ways is to contact the archive if the institution has an archive of special collections. And there are charges to document the history of the university, and a big part of that is the student voice. So we would hope that they would be interested in collecting that history as well. So I would definitely encourage you to contact either the university archivist if they have one, or a archivist, or the head of an archive in that institution. But if you have any, if you are interested outside of an alumni role, there are definitely community archives that are interested in taking archival materials as well.
Liz, if I'm not mistaken, this is Diana, who's a LMU alum.
Oh, awesome. Email me. I'll give you my email.
There we go.
Yes, I thought the question might be, so like how do our former students or alumni submit documents that they might want to contribute to this Latanya Reese Miles archive collection? Should they just email you?
So the Latanya Reese Miles collection is actually going into our university archives, and we actually have a subgroup of that that's just for the First to Go program. So all those materials will go for that First to Go program as part of the university archive. Yeah, so we're excited to have that be a part of that collection.
I just want to interject though and say, how badass is that to be like, oh yeah, I got some stuff I'm going to donate to the archive. I would have never thought about that shit as a student. Like, I got something I want to donate to my school archive? Hell no. That's just amazing. We're not going to really, truly see the impact of this for decades. That you show up at your institution and you got a first gen archive. That shit's nuts.
Yeah. Are parts or all of it available electronically?
So the collection is not available electronically. We actually are working right now towards getting it into an inventory to make it accessible as part of a finding aid or research guide. But there are at the moment, no plans to digitize. I don't know how I feel about digitizing your private journals, LT. But we are actually, we do have this project right now called the Inclusive History and Images Project. And we're really excited to say that LT did an oral history for us that will be available hopefully this coming in a few months. And additionally, we'll be uploading some of the photographs that LT donated to us to that project as well. So happy to share that with LT so she can, because she's really good at sharing it with everyone. So as soon as we have that available, we'll share it. We're working towards making it accessible. It's going to be a video, so we're working on the workflow of getting it transcribed right now.
Very cool. What's the archival? Can the public come into the archive? Is that?
Yes, for sure. And right now, because this collection is unprocessed, if you want to just send me an email to make an appointment, I'm happy to pull everything out for you. And just we're open Monday through Friday, 9 to 4.
One of the really exciting things as a professor and as a historian is more and more folks digging into their campus histories. And when I was at UCLA, there was a little bit of this, but I think it's become much more prevalent. And it's oftentimes like the history of activist groups, when they rioted at the dean's office, like these really, really powerful narratives, and even sort of ways in which like that's impacting how we do stuff. So one of the things that's happened here is Matt Garcia, who's a mentor in many ways, wrote this really great article about the Claremont College is sort of taking over one of the Mexican neighborhoods here, Algo Verde. And he donated those papers to CGU because he was a grad student here, and there's other documents from community members as well. So we've actually built walking tours based on those documents, and that we give to incoming students. And right now, I'm in communication with one of the local teachers at the elementary to think about doing that. And of course, this isn't to say that the university should be the only purveyor of our archival material or that it's always the right choice. But it does allow for a certain kind of new narrative to emerge, right? So it's really exciting to think about how LMU will continue to rethink its place for first to go students, for first gen students, and how the archive is part of that process. We probably have, I mean, we have a lot of time, but maybe we can do like one or two more questions. I know that folks got kids and I want to listen to that oral history now.
That was a really fun conversation, Liz. Got to witness that as well. I mean, I recorded it the day of the November 4th event. It was just fantastic questions, and a lot of it, I mean, it's oral history, so about my memory of things, but also a bit more about my story and my background. Ajaya, who's here right now, was who's probably joining us from North Carolina, is there, and she was a big part of what was like that magical time. But Jay, I want to thank you for being here and see if you have any thoughts about any of this. You know, you are in the archive, my friend. So and definitely in those journals.
Um, yeah, I mean, when you talk about that magical time, like I still think about it as that time, and that's why I'm so eager to come and be in this space with y'all and have these conversations. You know, I've worked in international ed in 15 years, but like that work with first gen students, you know, the bunch program, you know, going with first to go abroad, like that's all been highlight, and seeing each one of those students go and have these international experiences and whatever, you know, doors have opened after that for them. I still think about like how that affected them. So I mean, I don't really have a great question, but I don't know if you can talk about that a little bit more, or
About which part?
the first to go abroad and getting first gen students engaged in global.
Yeah, I'm gonna toss this one over to Danelle because that was one of the interesting things about the way we worked during that time is sort of even though Danelle and I were in sync, we also had our own sort of special interests. And Danelle, I mean, she had a really strong interest in globalization and taking students abroad, which is with her now. But that was one of her areas, and so I'll let her talk about that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And Jay, thank you for the question. Just seeing you here made me remember that I really wanted to talk about the international first gen experience and like how that has a role in this archive. So, you know, I never got to do a study abroad when I was an undergraduate. I worked full time. I had all these like different commitments. I was broke. Like I just did not, you know, think it was possible. And I didn't do it. And like the first time I went abroad was in my graduate program at my sister's urging. And I accompanied her for 2 weeks. And we went to Paris and Amsterdam and London. And that was just such a life-changing experience because I had all these like conceptions about international travel, like all these stories that I had been told. It's scary. It's too expensive. People like you don't travel. People like you don't do this. Our family doesn't do this, right? Like I was the only person in my very large extended family to move within 15 miles of my grandma's house. So, I mean, it was just like, this is not something we did. And when I was there and I like went through the experience, I realized like, oh my God, this is not only something that's like possible, but it's something that's necessary. Like this is a part of my life that has just become so important to me is just exploring these different spaces. And, you know, damn it, why don't I have access to these spaces? It's not fair. And why don't others, you know, first gen working class students have access to these spaces? So that has really like that really inspired my interest in this idea of like internationalizing first gen students. And so I thought a lot about that at LMU, and maybe it was just, you know, partly reinforced because me and LT would always talk about taking over the world, like first gen goes global. So it's natural that I started thinking about the first gen experience from an international perspective. But I've just been always really interested in life in other countries, like what life is like in other countries. And so that extends to like, what is it like to be a first gen student in the Dominican Republic, you know, or Canada or China or the UK, like any number of places, right, where this is an identity. And this is really the main focus of my work today at Cal State LA. And the really interesting thing that I found by leading so many of these international writing workshops over the years is that we have so much in common. Like it is crazy. All of the experiences that we think about and that the research tells us about, whether that's like culture shock or imposter syndrome or border living, survivor's guilt, and all those first gen qualities that we think about, like resourcefulness, resistance, resilience, creativity, right? These are not unique to the US American first gen college experience. They're not at all. And it is so beautiful to me when a student from East LA makes a really meaningful connection with a student from Northeast England based on shared experiences that transcend all types of difference, right? Because the difference is there, but those shared experiences are there too. And so again, like those connections are incredible. They also scream a need for change. They bring more attention and awareness to the first gen experiences and the challenges that first gen students sometimes face, as they go through their college career. So yes, I mean, like the international piece is so important. And I think that maybe is something that is missing right now from this particular archive, that we can start thinking about how to like fill that gap, how to internationalize it as the years go on.
Sounds like a lot of work in terms of the archive, like more to build it out and stuff. It's really exciting. Maybe we can do one more question if anybody has a. LT, do you want to close this out? You want to get the last word?
Sure. Well, I know John Ishii just got here. And he was a student at that time, as was Diana. So I want to see if there's a hey, son. John, we're at the Q&A portion. So do you have any questions or even thoughts that you want to offer?
I just wanted to say I'm really excited and happy I was able to get in. I'm going to watch the recording. Sorry for being a little bit late on that, but I want to give a shout out to Danelle and to LT as well. And I texted Danelle today. I actually have my notes still from First to Go from our ELA class, and then also the books and everything. So I was saying that that's crazy that I was able to find that and discover that. But that's it for me. I'm going to pass over back the mic over to you all. And I just want to say thanks again for letting me join you all for these last couple of minutes, and I appreciate it.
Thanks for being
Hi,
here.
John. Yeah, no, it's really coincidental, I guess. I was right now my family's moving, so I was like moving some boxes around, found some old things, and then found like that my mom had collected like all of the newspapers from when like that final year at LMU where I did a lot of activism, and like they're all just like carefully like folded and preserved, and I was like, oh yeah, that. And I think maybe they would like benefit from a new home, and so they don't get like squished in our in our frantic move. And it just brought everything back, and I thought about how difficult it was at that time to feel like we were the first ones doing stuff, even though we knew there was a legacy of undocumented students at LMU pushing for change, and that we were recipients of that change. Shush phone. But it would have been a total game changer, I think, if I had been able to go to an archive and like have like a blueprint in some way of how to make that change. I just kept thinking like I wish there was like a book I could check out from the library that was like how to make your institution change things, and first step, for dummies. Wait, sorry, I think I muted myself.
Yeah.
So just like how marvelous that would be, not just for us to be able to walk back into that time and like see how we were and how we did achieve these things, but then also like how like current first gen undocumented students at LMU can see that they have a legacy and that they're not alone. Wait, I think that's awesome.
One of the things that we've done with different projects in Miles is sort of at TGU has been part of all of them, is we often just scan stuff, and this is a way that communities can keep their original documents, and we just keep digital files too. So I would say that even if you donate your material, definitely get high-res scans for yourself, so that even if your archive goes somewhere, you and your family still have some sort of copy of that. just because it's always nice to be able to have your own records, right? Yeah.
That's actually lovely. Thank you for saying that. Because I was thinking just like maybe I can sacrifice these memories of mine for the greater good, but like maybe I don't have to choose. Maybe it can just be for everybody, including for my family.
And archivists are becoming really, really like not just receptive, but really proactive about this idea of ownership. Like I was in a conversation with the UCLA professor or archivist, and they were saying that they actively tell people not to sign over the material, but to like loan it out for a period of time as a way. And I think that's really interesting, right? Just like so, even the ways in which like the idea of ownership is changing too, right? And institutions are being more flexible with this idea of not being like the owners of it, but being like the custodians of it. Or so I think it's like a really exciting time for archives, I think.
That's really good to know and really wonderful. I think like the notion of ownership and property and all of that is something that endlessly vexes me because I don't really can't really find head or tail of it where like the our personal dynamics as like my own family and then just my friends and how we like loan stuff to each other all of the time, or thinking about how like just like general museum ethics, like things that are stolen but they're loaned really, but it not with permission. So it is helpful, I think, to think that like that archiving as a field is moving in a direction that's less flagrantly capitalist and a little bit more comfortable for the way that communities actually work. That's also really good to hear.
And if I could add something, for LT's archive, she kept her rights. When she signed the deed of gift, we didn't have her sign off her rights to us. So if someone wants to publish something of LT's diary, they have to ask her for permission, not the institution. So
LT's like, I didn't know that.
she
Look
did.
at
She
you, I'm
told it.
I did know. Liz and I had really great
Okay.
conversation.
All right, cool. I was like,
Liz, can you just say really quickly a little more about that? So like, how would that work? I'm just thinking like if we took students in there to do archival research and they wanted to quote from one of LT's journals, like how do they have to get in touch with her? Or?
Well, no, for educational purposes, we don't do that. But let's say a student writes something and eventually becomes like publishable, and they wanted to maybe like publish a copy of it, like a page of it, then they would have to ask for permission from LT. If they quote it, as long as they cite it, I think it's okay. But I think if they wanted to take like a page of her journal to like as like a copy and like put it somewhere in the publishing, they would have to let her know. But if someone was going to publish something, they oftentimes let us know and we would let LT know as well. But for the most part, it's educational use. We would have a student like, I mean, we would tell LT, like I tell LT, like I taught your journals today in my class, like, so in a very excited way, because we would love to show the use of it and how we're using it. But for that particular reason, it would be just like if someone wanted to like get permission to publish a page or something like that, but to quote it and things like that, it's still like under educational fair use and stuff like that.
Thanks.
very cool. I taught at Fresno State for 4 years, and Fresno is a different place. It's a beautiful place. Like the way you all talk about your golden years, I think about Fresno like that in a lot of ways. And I love CGU too, but Fresno was very, very special. But the first gen students are very different, right? For a lot of different reasons. So often I find myself having to really adapt and listen more, because the experience I had 20 years ago was not the same, and the struggles and challenges I had 20 years ago were not the same. So just even like as a pedagogical tool, just giving professors a chance to learn more about their students in ways that are maybe easy, not easier, but it's just like a resource for teachers too, right? So I think that's really cool. So we're in the Q&A portion, Dana. So not that you have to have a question, but if you do have a question, you're welcome to ask it.
Sorry, I don't know what was already asked, but hi, Ray. Well, I am
Dana,
not.
does that child belong to you?
This is yes.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
Why aren't you still 20 years old?
What you saying? I don't look it. So I am not in academia, but I'd like to know how we can apply the principles of LT into the corporate world? How can we like build more access, gain more access? And you probably all talked about it earlier, and I'm sorry I wasn't there, but I would like to know, as I'm on the other side. How can we be more LT? Yeah.
I'm not touching that. And no, we did not cover it either. So if anyone wants to address that, go right ahead.
I think that one of the big things that I got from LT's archive as like for my like own selfish ways of like what do I get from this is that the notion of reflection and journaling and how we can see the big pictures of our own lives, like our own, to kind of see what the next steps of our lives are. And I think in the corporate world we can say like if you document your day to day, sorry, my dog is being extra like needy right now, documenting the day to day and reflecting on what you did, what you do, where you want to be, where you want to go, I think is something that we can take from LT's work, where I'm taking from LT's work. Like tomorrow, one of my colleagues and I are doing a reflective journaling in the workplace workshop, and I'm going to talk about the LT archive, but also more like in how to apply it to our job, right? So we have to do annual reviews, and sometimes as Danelle mentioned, like you forget what you do on the day to day, right? Because you're just sometimes just trying to survive a week. But I think it's important to reflect on that and engage with that with yourself, right? Because it doesn't have to go to an institution, but it can be your own archive of what you did and celebrate and really engage with, this is where I want to be, right? And I don't know, I really appreciate LT's journals because, yeah, you would have the narratives and then someday she'll do a to-do list and you're like, oh, LT, you had a lot to do. And so it was kind of really cool to be able to be creative with that idea as well, of like not necessarily just having a journal to journal, but maybe you just had like a few seconds to write a few notes and that's what it is, right? So I think that's something that I take from LT's work that I'm inspired by every day.
I'll just add to that too. I know LT hates this question and is probably feeling so uncomfortable. You're amazing, so just deal with it. So when I think about LT, I mean, it's just like the listening, right? Like she's just so interested in people's stories. And I think, Romeo, when you're saying, I thought that I was a special one. Well, we all think that, right? Because she listens to us, like really makes an effort to get to know us. And like, you know, some people who, you know, you're talking to them and they're just sort of waiting for their turn to talk, waiting for their turn to like say something. They're not really hearing you. And I've never, ever felt like that with LT. Like she just really is genuinely interested in you as a person. And so like taking this back to the space of the archive, when I think about an archive, I think about this just amazing space of storytelling, right? Where we have these artifacts and these stories that just, you know, they've created a history, and that history is important. And the fact that it is institutionalized in this way, like that signals its importance in a way. And so whether it's like, you know, depending on the type of material, it's something that expresses a person's like anxieties, fears, obsessions, their thoughts, or just even what they did on the day to day. And like that is something that just LT embodies, this kind of space in the archive where you can just like share your artifact, and she just, you know, she gets it and she gives it space to just be, and she places value on it, right? And I'm thinking about how this could translate just to the professional world. I mean, that's just a transferable skill that can work in so many different capacities, whether it's like the business world or the way we listen to our students if we're teachers, but just like that human connection where you really care about what somebody else is going through and what they have experienced. Like that is, I think, the power behind LT, or part of the power. There's a lot of power, but that's part of the power behind her.
Are there shirts that exist right now that say the power of LT?
No, oh my God, stop it.
Someone's
I'm not going to answer Dana's question, but I do I do want to bring up something that Romeo and I talked about just really offhandedly yesterday, um, about sort of the imprint and impact of an archive like this. And it's reflective in this space right now where Dana, Romeo and I go way, way back. UCLA days. And then, of course, we have LMU represented. Oh, Chantel. Oh, my God. Shantizi. Girl, I forget how I know you, Chantel. That's why I didn't say anything. um, and, 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 you know, we all don't stay in the same physical spaces. We move on. But one of the things I've been always pushing toward is sort of not having borders and boundaries. And for Ajaya who's on the East Coast to say, oh, we need to have a field trip to come back and visit. And Miles, I'm not sure where you are, but I think we could lean into that as well, that this really isn't about a singular institution, right? It's a space, and people can go to a physical space that is much bigger than that. That was one of the things that struck me about the in-person event in November, is how many folks came from other institutions that had nothing to do with LMU. There was a good amount of representation from UCLA as well. So I think that when we're looking at sort of the history of first gen programs, they're still very much they've gone from being one program to like, okay, what is a school doing? I would say we need to think bigger and much broader than that. You see that in the Facebook group, where it's, like I said, 7,200 people, et cetera. That's why I'm so attracted to social media, because it's really not about one school. It's not about LMU. Liz, you were gonna say something? It looked like you unmuted yourself.
Oh shoot, no, I guess I never muted myself. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, I do have a final word to say about legacy whenever I have the final word. Now's a good time. Diana, you brought it up, and I think I have 3 points I want to make about that. That's really where my head is right now, is this concept of legacy, and not just like the individual first-gen student, but what does it mean sort of going forward and looking backwards. So number one, I'm so honored to have my two children, my two are now adults, at the November 4th event that were sitting right there in the front row. And I can't even imagine what that is like, me being first gen, have my son and my daughter right there, who they say they remember, like Romeo, Chantel, Dana, they remember you guys, from watching you when they were little. And I actually deliberately asked Jabari, who's 25 now, y'all. I asked him what was that like for him, and he says he cannot remember not being on a college campus. Like, that's for a first gen kid. I'm a first gen kid, and now my son is saying he can't. He was literally born at UCLA Medical, so was Zoe, and we lived on the UCLA campus. So he doesn't even know what that experience is like. That's crazy. What's also crazy is Zoe was in school in Chicago at the time of this event. And so I helped her write the email to her professor saying, I'm going to miss class on Friday because I got to go be at my mother's special archive. Like, flex on, that's a flex and a half. I love it. It's just, that is amazing. And then the last thing about Zoe too is she now wants to be a curator, right? And so Liz, she's gonna follow up with you. And I love that for her, that's how she sees her way of contributing to the world, and being really thoughtful and deliberate about marginalized communities, historically underserved folks, et cetera. So it's amazing in one generation to see all of that. It's awesome. It's awesome. So that was a good way of giving updates for some of you all too, but it's really, really significant. It's Dana, you were not here when I said this, but I said we really aren't going to fully see the whole impact of this for decades to come.
I'm gonna say I have someone at my company who I just gravitated to, and then I started talking, and then I found out he used to be a McNair at Berkeley, and it was like, we're gonna transform this, like you and I, like we're gonna, and we just kind of like find each other. We're like the X-Men, and I don't think I had that instinct to know to look out for people and sense that without you. So, thank you, LT, for everything that you've done. I think I struggled a little, like, oh, well, you know, she prepared me to go into academia, and I'm not there. And I think there was this moment where I was like, am I doing the right thing? And I realized, yeah, there's no boundaries. And I feel like I'm equipped to do things where I'm at, and that's the power of LT. Bye.
I want to see more baby. Right? Oh, like that jersey.
Yeah, jersey. It's messy. Messy? Yeah, messy.
Well, thanks, Romeo, for first of all, even putting this idea in my head to have this kind of conversation. It was based on something that you had shared on social media or something. And thank you for really setting this up. Like your intro was perfect. It was needed, it was critical, and it really helped elevate the conversation. So I want to thank you for that, and thank each and every one of you for being here tonight. And of course, so much thanks to Danelle for just like being my partner in so many things. And literally, we were, like I said, buying journals for one another and giving them to each other. Didn't know it was going to turn into this, but I think that's one of the beautiful things about the story as well. You just never know. And your stories matter. I think that's really the main thing. Your story matters.
Well, I think
You really are giving me the last word. Romeo, close us out.
all right. You know, big ups to the archivist, right? Big ups to the students, everyone who's part of this. You know, I think the archive is a place where we can imagine futures, where we can sort of rectify past injustices, and I'm excited to see what kind of futures this archive is going to build for us, right? So, big thanks for everyone for being here, and I think with that we can all go have dinner or have a beer or whatever y'all are going to go do, hang out with the babies.
Thanks, everybody.